Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen, today we're going to be talking about the potential for a Black Swan event. Now, if you don't know what a Black Swan event is, I'm just going to say you're not missing out unless you're looking to be buying cryptos for very, very cheap, right? For very, very cheap. So, a black swan event is practically when something in the markets in the world goes crazy, like COVID, for example, things crash to very low prices and then eventually they start recovering and then, things start pumping. Okay. So we have a prime example here when Bitcoin was around $9,800. Right, we can see it started to sell off, right? It started to sell off in mid-February all the way down to, let's say, mid-March. And that was when the prime of COVID happened. Okay, that was when the prime of COVID happened. Now, I actually do remember these price points because when I was getting mentored at the time in terms of certain technical analysis, we actually were expecting, in terms of pure technical analysis, this type of dump, right? I remember it clear as day. We were expecting some type of buys in this overall general zone. And it was like the craziest thing ever because I was still on my journey to becoming a better and better trader, right? I was in the crypto world for a while, but the trading world I was introduced a little bit later. And, this was still part of like my growth journey and everything. And I remember this, it was fantastic to witness. But look, anyways, enough about me. Let's talk about the actual event, right? Usually, Black Swan event is when something's really going on crazy with the world, right? Last time we had COVID, and now we have the potential talks of World War III. And things are escalating between Iran and Israel. And unfortunately, with the way it's trending, it could get really close to World War III or potentially even start. Now, I don't think it's necessarily going to start, but I do think there could be some market manipulation, right? There's always that probability. So we can see, right, Bitcoin went from practically 10K down to 3.8, dropping roughly 60% in a short matter of time. Now, I don't think Bitcoin is going to drop those same types of numbers in terms of percentages, right? If we were to drop 60%, I mean, we would be going below very, very certain levels, and pretty much this whole market would just explode and die. Okay. But there is a opportunity for the market makers to fill a gap that has been lingering around the 92K area, which we have talked about before, that we find extremely, extremely annoying, right? Extremely annoying. We do have a gap at 92,000. So the market makers, especially if, there are going to be more escalations, could use this just simply as an excuse to move the markets back down to 92,000, potentially even down to high 80s, and then eventually start moving quickly to the upside. Okay. This is something we have to consider because of the tensions that are happening. Okay. If the tensions were not happening, for me, I would still say there's a high probability that we would be ignoring these gaps until next cycle. Because here's the reality, people. Okay. Gaps don't always have to get filled. They don't always have to get filled. You could even argue here, there's a gap at 20,000, right? There's a gap at 20,000. Is this a visual glitch or not? Because for me, this doesn't seem like a visual glitch. Okay. So maybe we will see Bitcoin at 20K one day. Maybe if there's going to be a big bubble in, in 2026, right? Or if obviously the world goes to crap. But look, ladies and gentlemen, overall, right? Like I said, I'm super optimistic. But like I said, we do have to consider the possibilities. So let's play devil's advocate and let's say we did crash back down. Where are the key areas? Well, like I said, the first area I'm looking for is this gap to be filled. Now, just because the gap gets filled doesn't mean automatically it's going to reverse instantly, right? We can see actually when we did fill this gap over here, boom, back in March, we still, failed to go higher and then eventually swept liquidity. And then we start to go up, right? We took out this key point over here, faked out, and then had a huge pump, right? We still went thousands and thousands of dollars lower. In fact, if I actually go and look and measure it for myself, we still went roughly $3,200 lower. 3,300, 3,200, 3,400, somewhere there, right? Lower. So if we did have something similar where we went 3 to 4,000 lower, right, we could be seeing potentially price action going back down to this zone over here, which would make sense, right? Because look, if we go and look at this, right, boom, look at this. This is something people have been talking about, right? That we are kind of creating a reverse head and shoulders. Okay. Now, for me, I didn't really care that that was the possibility. But ever since the war and ever since we haven't been following global liquidity to the T, it has been on my mind more and more. The thing is, as a trader, you can't be stubborn, right? You can't be stubborn. You have to go with what technical analysis says. And if technical analysis suggests that we will be going lower, then that is just how it's going to be. As of right now, we have very, very weak and dirty multiple weekly candles, right? Nothing too convincing. We would need to start seeing certain candles close above certain areas, which I'll mark up in a second. We were talking about in another video how I did not want to see us closing below practically $105,400, but we've done it. Okay, we've done it. And from what I see at this current moment, right, if we actually get rid of this global liquidity, is that we are consistently creating lower and lower highs, right? Lower high, lower high, lower high. Okay. And we can see we did retest off of this zone right over here, right? This key zone over here, we literally retested off it and instantly sold off. So not very ideal. So this is kind of one of the last lifelines, right? If we do not respect this wick, that goes into here, right? Following the triple tap philosophy, then, you know, if we do not start going up and start creating higher highs, then there's a very high chance that when we do pull up again, based off this area, that we go roughly to 107,000, and then we start selling off very, very aggressively. And once we start breaking down, right, the next zone we probably stop around is going to be around $100,000. Okay. And after that, probably a little bit of a bounce back, but then nothing too crazy. And that's when we start filling up the gaps, filling up some type of imbalances, and then eventually start going up higher and higher and higher. When we look at the 4-hour imbalances, we do have an imbalance right over here, a very, very big one between the 90,000 to 88,500, which would also perfectly align with the gap getting filled right around 92,000 and then us going down a couple thousand more before we shoot up. So this is something we have to consider, right? This wasn't on the table a couple of weeks ago. Why? Well, the war, the tensions between Israel and Iran were practically non-existent, right? And if there were some, they weren't the same way. They weren't at the same, they're not at where they are today, right? They officially started to like fight each other, war. I mean, so, you know, this is why we have to readjust our game plan. It's actually very, very unfortunate that we aren't following global liquidity, because for those that don't know, we were following it to the T, right? Perfect. We had a 91 delay from these tops here. We had a 91 delay from these bottoms here. And then when we were going up consistently, right, it was perfect. It was literally following it perfectly up until we got to this point over here, right? We had the top, we had the bottom, we had the top, we had the sell-off. We expected some manipulation. Okay, we got manipulation. And after that manipulation, we never got this. We never got this pump, okay? We never got the pump that we desired, right? According to global liquidity and based off our measurements before, we should have been roughly at 120K right now and possibly at 140K mid-July. But right now, it does not seem like that at all. It does not seem like that at all. So we will be keeping you guys updated, right? We will be keeping you guys updated. But yeah, just consider this as a potential, right? If this were to happen, boom, right? Price would drop 16%. Altcoins probably drop 30 to 50%. But yeah, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys did enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.